Hi, I'm Max Weisbrod. I'm founder of Baton, a free executive search firm for startups. And today I'm joined by Luke Versweyveld, who is the founder of Startup Founder Daily, a free PR firm for startups, and also the founder of Cuvée Counsel, which is a fractional general counsel for early stage companies. Luke, can you tell us a little bit more about what you do?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me on the show, Max. I'm really looking forward to it. So I'll touch most of the conversation on Cuvée Counsel, which, as you mentioned, it's a law firm, but I also serve as fractional general counsel for startups. I do both. So sometimes companies reach out to me for one-off projects, and I'm happy to help out in that capacity. But I really do enjoy getting in early with early stage companies, helping them address their legal needs and start off with a good foundation, legally speaking, and growing with the company. So I am based in Chicago, and I graduated from the University of Virginia School of Law. Was very fortunate to attend UVA, and I thought I would go into big law like pretty much all of my classmates. While I was there, I had the really awesome opportunity to join a biotech startup. And at that point, that was my first foray into startups. And I realized that this is what I wanted to be doing. So after graduation, I slid in as in-house counsel there. Unfortunately, they were not immune to the macroeconomic environment that I'm sure a lot of founders can relate to right now. And due to some austerity measures, I moved outside counsel as a fractional. So I ended up setting up my own firm, have really fantastic clients, have added about 6 clients since then. But I'm really excited to be on the show because I am relatively early into the fractional game, and I can learn just as much from you on this podcast. So I'm very excited.
Over the last couple of years, there has been a large move where a bunch of people with executive experience have had this opportunity to, leave the place where they were a W-2 and become 1099. And at that time, they're able to start to control more of their income, control their relationships with clients, work with who they want to, and, have more flexibility in their schedules, right? Being able to, go on a trip somewhere in the middle of the week or anything you might think of. Those kinds of things are upsides to the change in arrangement. But when we're looking at your clients, these 5 new clients that you brought on, right? Where were they in their journey where they said, I would really benefit right now from somebody I can ask these legal questions, somebody who is able to support me as I, bring on customers, all that?
Yeah, absolutely. So most of my clients have been more or less day one. So they either want my help to set up the entity, to incorporate and everything associated with that, or they're just after that and have sticker shock at what it costs to go with the big firms. So that's the primary client I have. I also have some clients that are a little bit farther along in their life cycle that realize they may or may not have prioritized their legal needs to the extent that they should have. There were some issues that they were facing, some things that have been overlooked, and then I kind of work backwards and kind of rebuild that foundation. So I do prefer to get in early and help them at the very earliest stages. And then, as I alluded to in the intro, I really like to grow with them. And so what I would see out of an ideal client relationship is getting in very early, growing with the company, taking them through a non-priced financing. If that happens, if they raise on a convertible note or a safe, at that point, I would typically hand them off to a bigger firm with more of the resources just for a little bit more expertise. But I live in that first year or 2 years where they're just trying to establish product market fit and making sure that they start off on a strong legal foundation.
So I've got, two things popped up there. First is, what is day one? And the second is, you said that there were specific legal issues that were popping up inside of some of these clients. So first, can you tell us a little bit about what day one is?
Yeah. So what I think of as day one, and not to be confused with my friends at the Day One Accelerator, who are fantastic, and I'm actually I work with them and get a lot of clients out of that accelerator. But I like to join companies at their day one, which is either they want to start a business and they have a bunch of questions on where to start. So something that is kind of frustrating to me, especially when you commit to start working with a lawyer, is right out the gate, it's going to be incredibly expensive. And a lot of founders they go in not knowing what they don't know. So a lot of the first things that you need to decide, am I doing an LLC or a C Corp? Am I starting as an LLC and then transferring it into a C Corp? Why is everyone starting in Delaware? How do you split up co-founder relationships? Everything like that you can find from a non-lawyer. Like, you don't per se need a lawyer to understand those things. But if you don't know what you're looking for, and if you don't know where to look for it, it's really hard. So a lot of the first couple meetings you'll have with a lawyer, and mind you, you're paying, $700 an hour if you're working with a big law lawyer, it's just them explaining basically how it works. So a lot of the times I slide in and walk them through the ramifications of starting a business. And Max, you and I were talking off camera. There's really, really great things, great platforms out there like Stripe Atlas, which I do encourage you to use. But even that, so they, I believe, only do C Corps in Delaware, which I almost always advocate for my clients. A lot of times they're like, why? I'll do this because it's a good value and it starts my business off on the strong footing. But a lot of them don't even really understand why they should be going in that direction. So day one can be the preliminary questions you have when starting a business. Where do I even begin? What do I need to be thinking about in terms of entities and regulations and permits and things like that? Or they have thought about those things. They're ready to incorporate. They would like my help incorporating and all of the legal things that come on afterwards. And then you had your second question, if I can jump to that, which is what happens if you don't prioritize your legality or your legal work? And I don't want to go into too much of specifics for this client, but for instance, if you are putting together conflicting contracts, like let's say that you start a business by yourself and then you bring on a partner and then you bring on another partner. I have seen instances where there are 3 conflicting bylaws legally speaking, they kind of mix each other as they go, but there's kind of a free-for-all in terms of documents. You don't know which one is governing. If you hand them to employees, they don't know if this is the current understanding of the company or if it has been superseded by a subsequent document. It's more just about disorganization than doing anything that's really going to get you into trouble. And I have seen that too, missing out on permits. And usually it's pretty forgiving. You can go back and pay any fines and fees that you have accumulated and get it all squared away. But a lot of times you are all about growing. You're all about hitting your stride, and you don't think about these things that you don't want to slow you down as you start hitting that trajectory. Or if you are fortunate enough to be talking with partners or a potential acquirer or something that's going to throw a wrench into those works.
Are there any specific verticals or industries or business models where it's particularly beneficial to have a fractional CLO in those early stages? Is there particular, are some more legal heavy?
Yeah, there's certainly industries that are more legal heavy that you have to be a little bit more mindful. My background, as I said, is in biotech, and that's something that's obviously heavily regulated, much more heavily regulated than if you're doing e-commerce or SaaS or things like that. So there is a lot of uniformity in terms of the needs of early stage startups, especially the ones I work with, contracts with clients, contracts with your employees, equity issuance, things like that, especially when it comes to permitting and licensing and facing regulatory hurdles. That's when it matters much more on an industry by industry basis. And so I have a client who's a little bit more in the privacy space, and that comes with its own beast of regulatory things, SOC 2 compliance and whatnot. I still cater heavily to the biotech company that I started as a W-2. They're currently my largest client as a fractional executive, so I'm still very intimately involved there and dealing with the FDA process, going first in human clinical trials, making sure that all of the animal studies are in compliance with what the FDA will look for, and I lend a governing eye there too.
So it's not just I've got some direct consumer product or some other thing like that. It's really there's a heavy emphasis on these regulated industries or industries where you're dealing with more sophisticated counterparties, like a venture-backed startup, for example. They would have to you don't want to learn after the fact, after you sign a term sheet, oh yeah, here's what a preference overhang is.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And I'll walk back a little bit what I said about kind of exiting before a company raises a price round, because I think that's such a critical point where you can you can spend tens of thousands of dollars working with the big firms. So I would like to remain kind of very much up to that point and walk them through the process of expectations, what terms are customary in those agreements, the equity sales, the difference between preferred stock and common stock, what investors might want to get in their preferred stock in terms of special preferences and contractual terms that will remain with your company basically for the rest of your life. And obviously those will all be given a second look by any firm that you choose to go with afterwards. But yes, going back on what you said, I do play in a couple of regulatory fields, but even companies that we threw out like D2C, e-com, things like that, probably don't put too much thought into their terms and conditions. They probably copied and pasted terms and conditions from some website they found. Usually they can benefit from a little tailoring, things like that. So even if you are not in a quote unquote heavily regulated space, there are nuances from industry to industry that I think a lot of founders don't think of. And yeah, I'm here to help there.
And even if you're going in and you're selling your first pilots into enterprise or anything like that, being able to, cut your deal in, you're able to find tons of money inside of that deal space, depending on how you structure that contract. I've definitely seen that inside of my clients. So they know that they need you because they see, okay, we've got these contracts that are conflicting. We've got, these disagreements that are coming up. Where does it go when a situation comes like that? I mean, hopefully we're not like getting to litigation, right? Like, how do you see yourself in terms of, guiding stakeholders through disagreements?
Yeah, and it's a little tricky from the lawyer perspective because my client is the company, not founder, not a specific person in the company. So I try to make it clear that I am here to make everyone get along, and I'm not trying to favor a person or have somebody win out or anything like that. So to your point on litigation, no, I'm not a litigator. I'm a corporate attorney. So I help out with like inter-firm conflicts. So if founders are 50-50 and need like a deadlock provision, what happens if you can't agree? That would be an interpersonal conflict. And again, I am here to paint the broad picture. I am here to explain the ramifications and help execute whatever they decide. But like I don't work for the CEO. I work for the company and kind of go from there. So usually that process is they run up against, they're running at full speed, launching their startup. They run up against a legal issue, whether that's a weird contract thing or a disagreement among themselves, or they're trying to land a big client and need a contract turned around. They start doing their research. They realize that lawyers are not cheap. They start looking for other alternatives. And that's really the place I want to stay in. The firm is just me, so I don't have any overhead. I can afford to charge much, much less than firms. My background as a founder helps me understand that their needs a little bit better. They need things fast. They want to move fast and break things, as much as I hate to say that as a lawyer, but it's just a different mindset than when you're working with large Fortune 500 companies. And I hope that I supply that founder's mindset and provide the legal needs that they have at a much more favorable price point than the big firms.
So when you bring on a new client, how do you discover like their as-is state? How do you understand, everything about the company and pull up the documents that exist? What does that process look like by which you're able to understand where they are?
Yeah, so I have a list of questions that I run through them with, and that'll actually typically take point on that intro call. So before I engage with a client, I send them an engagement letter, formalize the relationship. But I usually walk them through the checklist just so I can frame my thinking about their problems and to make sure that there's nothing that I can't do. It is a big problem if a lawyer takes on an engagement that they're not qualified to do, they're not licensed to do, which a lot of people have questions on. So I'll touch on that for a little bit. So I'm licensed in the state of Illinois. But so many startups are Delaware incorporated, which Delaware is so dominant that corporate lawyers not licensed in the state of Delaware in almost all circumstances can practice Delaware. So I actually don't have any Illinois clients, oddly enough. I mean, even though I'm licensed here, my clients are Delaware corporations, and I'm totally comfortable to do that because it's such a dominant classification of law. Sorry to divert that question a little bit, but I will run through a questionnaire with them. And this is both to make sure that they didn't miss any huge step in their legal formation. You know, if they plan to be a Delaware corporation, but their principal place of business is elsewhere, did they actually do that filing? How does that look? Did they have the requisite permits and things like that? Walk them through the list before getting to the crux of their question, because they usually come to me with a specific question. But all this questionnaire helps put color around that need, because maybe it's not a need at all. Maybe some things have to happen before we even get to that need. So yes, I have a pretty formulaic process that I walk them through before engaging with them.
So for these companies, what are they seeing out in the world that says, okay, now compliance is important to me as a founder? As you said, you know, it's a move fast, break things type environment. Usually there's some sort of external pressure that's saying, okay, I have to actually do this right now.
Yeah, absolutely. So it depends on the life cycle. And like I said, the life cycle is somewhat finite, but there's a big difference between a company who has not even incorporated yet and one who's, let's say, a year in. So you're exactly right on the external pressure, whether they get a message from their jurisdiction that says that they are not compliant in some capacity. That's a pretty big trigger. If they're working with a client and the client's like, oh, and of course we'll need to put this contract in place. And they're like, oh, I don't actually know what that is. That would be an external influence. Or a, interpersonal conflict like we talked about, or not even conflict. We are bringing on an employee. We want to issue them equity. Where do we begin? What type of equity? Are we doing stock options? Are we doing RSAs? So it usually is a defining moment where they realize that they need legal help. And it can look like a lot of different things, but those are some of the basics.
And now, like, shifting gears to talk more about the, building of a fractional practice and those concerns. So earlier you said that you've got this relatively key relationship with the Day One Accelerator. How did that come into being? What does that relationship look like? And how do you maintain that relationship?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I'll take one step back and say that pretty much all of my exposure into the startup space has been through my Startup Founder Daily, which is actually really funny because I started that with no idea that I would be fractional at some point. So I actually eventually want to be on the investor side of the table. And a year and a half ago, I was like, how can I take steps towards that goal now? And it seemed like every investor was on Twitter. So I started a Twitter account just giving shout outs to founders. And that snowballed into the platform that it is now, which is a platform to showcase your startup and compete for free PR. We have a voting cohort every week. Companies submit their profile. The top 3 companies each week are featured in our newsletter and on our blog and on our socials. And it's been just really meaningful. I've met so many amazing people. Of those amazing people that I met is Andrew Hutton, the CEO of the Day One Accelerator. He actually reached out to me through my newsletter. I didn't know he was a subscriber, but he responded to one of the editions and said he liked what we were doing. Would we be interested in a newsletter swap? I started researching Day One. I think they're doing great work. They had got a great newsletter, which is incredibly informative. We did a swap. He sent subscribers my way. I sent subscribers his way. And I was like, I love meeting people in this space. Let's hop on a call. He walked me through Day One. Like I said, I think really highly of what they're doing. And they have a whole network of preferred vendors. So if you need an accountant, if you need really any external service to your startup, that's kind of the space that lives on their platform. And they did not have a go-to legal person. And at that time, I had just started off actually only like a month prior to that. And I was like, well, I'd be very interested in helping out your startups. And the rest is kind of history. I have developed a really great relationship with them. I actually met you, Max, because we featured Baton on Startup Founder Daily and had you on the podcast. Andrew is going to be the new host of our podcast. So we're even better establishing that relationship. And the way I nurture that is, I talk to him on a pretty regular basis now because we're partnering on more than just the preferred vendor, but just open communication. I try to be as honest as possible and transparent as possible. and frequent communication, making sure that both parties are addressing the other's needs and everyone is playing nice and getting along. And that's kind of the key to a healthy partnership.
That's so interesting. So this last weekend, I was talking to Morgan Bennett in New York, who runs a breakfast club for tech founders and VCs. And he's like a first-year associate, right? Who has this club that he's built that has like over 1,000 different, founders and venture capitalists have moved through it. And he said that one of the most influential ideas behind this is this concept of, don't try to get on somebody else's yacht, build your own. It's very inspirational that you just decided one day, okay, I'm just going to, start to, reach out to and promote these founders and build those relationships by giving them like this small hit of free value. How did you come up with that concept? Did you see something in the market? How did you get that idea?
And you're talking about Startup Founder Daily specifically?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So it was kind of a bilateral relationship because I realized that founders are desperate to get the word out about their company in every medium and any way they can. So whether that's just creating a Crunchbase profile or tweeting about what you're doing, posting all over social media. So even when the account, and it started as just a solo Twitter account, even when we only had 100 followers, there was still value in us just like giving people shout outs because A, it's free, and B, even if it only gets a few eyeballs, it's better than nothing. So I realized that there is kind of this never ending desire there to have somebody give you a shout out. And it started getting a lot of traction. People seemed to buy into what we were doing. And from that point on, it became a little bit more structured. So at first, I was just kind of looking around the startup ecosystem. I was like, oh, this person's building something cool. I'm just going to give them a quick shout out. Then I flipped it to applications. So people would tell me a little bit about the company. I would look through them, pick my favorite, feature 3 companies a week. And we did that for about 8 months. And we were growing the newsletter. People enjoyed reading about our founders. The founders who got featured enjoyed getting featured. And it was in January of this year that I was like, I wonder if we could give this power back to the community rather than me sorting through applications, picking my favorites, introduce a little virality, introduce a little bit more engagement, have the community pick their favorite companies, and we would go from there. So I am not technical at all, but I built out this really makeshift voting platform on our Webflow website. The backend was actually just a Zapier integration that did update live item. It was really janky, and we couldn't screen for fake email addresses, and people were submitting like celebrity email addresses and voting multiple times, and we couldn't really screen for that. And so after about 3 weeks, we had essentially proven that people really got behind this. We saw so much web traffic that I had to upgrade my Zapier account 3 times because I kept going above the Zap limit. And then I quietly closed that, found a dev shop, started building out the platform that we just launched a couple weeks ago, which has been really rewarding and exciting. This is the second voting cohort. They run from Monday to Monday. Top 3 companies after that time get featured on our platform. So it was very organic and it was very incremental based on the feedback I was getting from the community, based on what I could handle. For instance, we used to be on Instagram and TikTok, and it was eating up a ton of time, and we never really mastered it. I'm sure we'll go back to that someday, but we realized that most of our audience lived on the written platforms like Twitter and LinkedIn and blog. It was a more bang for our buck focusing our time there, and we could do it better if we left aside some of the other things. I should mention that I am joined by my brother-in-law, Henry Allen, who helps me out. He's been really, really helpful, especially because I'm juggling Startup Founder Daily with Cuvée Council, which eats up a full-time job in and of itself. So like I said, I did not have any intentions of building it with like co-building a fractional service on top of it. But I am eternally thankful for it because, as I mentioned at the beginning, I was kind of forced into the fractional life because, the startup was a little scrapped for cash. I didn't want to see a big hit to my income. I ventured out on my own, set up a law firm, and I would have nowhere near the success I've had landing clients if I didn't have the community that I had built. So I know Twitter loves to say like, oh, start with a community, build a community and build a startup around it. And it was unintentional, but I can say that that has benefited me in more ways than I can explain when I have got started on the Kube side.
So in earlier conversations with other fractional executives, there has been this theme of the actual consultancy, the fractional practice itself. It's unsellable, right? It's not a saleable asset. So it becomes very interesting that you've built really a lead generation machine, a community, this more scalable asset that is that has like synergies with your fractional service. Where do you see things going from here? As you said earlier in the call, you feel like Cuvée Council, with your current staffing model, which is basically just you, that becomes a little bit hard to scale further than where you currently are. So how do you think about like the vision and future of both of these things and how they work together?
Yeah, absolutely. So I do think there is an opportunity for somebody to build a very niche down just startup law firm. If they can, with that sort of overhead, if they can still keep the prices meaningfully lower than the big firms and really specialize in startup, I think that's a great business, and I think that would be really successful. I personally don't see that for myself. At this time, I have no plans to grow the firm and add associates and whatnot. I really like what I'm doing now. I like being the sole person at Cuvée. I feel like it, leads to a much more intimate relationship with my clients. The model works really well, especially because I'm doing something on the side. I honestly, my time is about 50-50 between Cuvée and Startup Founder Daily. And what's so nice about being the only one doing fractional work is you can ratchet it up and down, right? So like right now, I am really prioritizing my billable hours because that is the dependable source of income. Whereas Startup Founder Daily is pre-revenue. I'm basically funneling the money I'm making from Cuvée into Startup Founder Daily. But eventually, I see that being a pretty profitable business. And at that time, I can afford to spend more time on that and drop Cuvée accordingly. It's really flexible. It works with the lifestyle a lot of building two things at once because you can kind of pick and choose what you give time to some extent, right? Like obviously I'm beholden to my clients. I'm not going to blow a deadline because I'm working on Startup Founder Daily, but I can choose to not pursue clients as heavily. I can choose to send them in a different direction or whatnot. And that just is a really comfortable lifestyle. And I think it leaves my future a lot more flexible and easy and able to pivot based on what happens. So startups go down all the time. And I don't think that's going to be the case for Startup Founder Daily, but if it is, I still have this practice and working with early stage startups. If it becomes as successful as I hope it can be, I can slowly wind that down and spend more of my time on Startup Founder Daily stuff. And that's what I see for my future right now. Like I said, I don't really have too many ambitions to add more people to Cuvée. I want to grow the practice. I want to add more clients. I want to broaden my expertise in the space, which is really fun. Every time I get a new client from a new vertical, I feel like I get a crash course into that vertical. Like I said, there's a lot of common themes from startups. The legal needs are more alike than not alike. But every time I pick up a new client in a vertical I haven't experienced, it has its own character, it has its own struggles and difficulties. And hopefully in a few years, I will have touched on most verticals there are, which I hope will serve me in every aspect of my career.
Well, it's been really incredible speaking with you, Luke. Thank you so much for coming on the show. Where is the best place for people to find you?
So it depends on what you're looking for. If you want to showcase your startup, head to startupfounderdaily.com. You can find us on Twitter and LinkedIn as well. It's totally free, as I mentioned. If you are looking for some legal support, my law firm is cuveecounsel.com, Cuvee counsel.com. You can also find my personal Twitter account and get a hold of me through there. And those are the primary spots where you reach me.
Okay. Well, thank you so much and have a great day.
Yeah, thanks so much, Max. It was great talking to you. Appreciate it.